I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
Well, sometimes I like to be authentic and sometimes I'm not sure if I am. But, it's sort of like a chameleon. I think overall I'm mostly authentic. But Nikki, what do you think about authenticity?
I'm laughing because I'm like, oh, I think you're very skilled at practicing it.
I am.
Authenticity is a value that I feel very connected to. It's something that I practice quite a bit personally and professionally. I talk a lot about it with my supervisees, actually, as they're learning to become therapists, right? How to balance.
I wish I had a supervisor like you.
Oh, that's very sweet. I wish I had a supervisor like you.
That was not authentic.
Yes, it was.
I know.
It totally was. It totally was. I think it's so important because I think what you're getting at a little bit and what you just said is that we like being a chameleon, we have many different roles that we play. Authenticity is something sort of deeper than that, is what I would argue.
Yeah. And I guess I just dove right in because I guess there are times where because of our roles, I feel less authentic in a given situation, so like if I'm, it's kind of like when people are, discussing politicians or like, I don't know, we've got like governor things going on now. And it's like, how authentic are people in the public life, and, for my stance, I'm going to say, that it's a job, they're not fully authentic, they're really, they might find some authentic values underlying maybe, but then also maybe not, because it might just be paying the bills.
No, I think that's very true. And I think, this is where actually I'm glad you used that example, because I think we want to be really careful to distinguish authenticity from honesty, because I think this gets confused a lot of times with people, right? Like, because I think honesty, is a value as well. And honesty obviously means like sharing truth, right? Sharing facts. Certainly authenticity and honesty oftentimes go hand in hand, though I think the reason I want to sort of be careful with that is that we may choose not to share every truth and we can still practice authenticity. And of course, the reason I'm thinking about this in this way is in our roles as psychologists, right? So we, and even on this podcast, Pete and I share some things about ourselves, though we're more private about our own lives, because in therapy, we don't want to take up that much space, right? It's about making space for the patient and, among, the other reasons, though I still feel very authentic when I'm in that role. And so I often say to patients,
I like this.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad. I'll say to patients, I'll say, look, different roles mean that we speak in different ways, we wear different clothes, we share or don't share different things. And I'll say, like, if you saw me on the street, talking to a friend or something, I would say, look, I might be dressed a little bit differently, or I might be using slightly different language than you hear, or very different language than you hear me using in session. I'm like, but I would still feel like the same Nikki.
Right.
And it's like, we can't measure it, but it's like, we know. You know what I mean? This is where we talk about this in other ways in other episodes. It's like the stuff we don't have Western tools to measure yet. Though humans intuitively, we know authenticity when we feel it from in ourselves and in other people.
Well, and also like, what is that? Jim Carrey's Liar Liar movie, like no one could be 100% truthful.
Sure.
I mean, sure. I don't know, half the listeners probably never even seen that movie, but I mean, for the listeners, like also, if you've never been in psychotherapy or curious about it and kind of tuning in about that, as psychologists, and even and that's why Nikki was saying about this When East Meets West, that we are boundaried around what we share around ourselves, even though we're our authentic self, that we are still going to be characterologically kind of, similar to who we are with friends or on the street, but in a boundaried way, because that's how this works. And the APA definition of authenticity actually references psychotherapy, because it says in psychotherapy, genuineness and caring demonstrated by the therapist or counselor through a down-to-earth attitude that the client senses to be a reflection of the true person and not simply of a professional acting in his or her professional role.
Good job, APA. No, that's right. It's like there's something again, that's why I'm using the word intuitive. Like,
Yeah, I like that.
we sense it, right?
Yeah.
Like we sense it, and we sense it ourselves.
And we say like there are certain groups, like say like adolescents, like they have the bullshit meter, like
right.
you can't pretend
Yeah.
to be something. If they say like a
Right.
song that I've never heard of, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, cool. Like,
right.
no, I'm going to
Right.
be like, I don't know what that is. So now you're just making me feel old,
Right. Totally. Well, and I think like, look, people can struggle to connect with their authentic selves because of certain contexts they'll find themselves in. Like, I think maybe a great example would be, we've all felt imposter syndrome at some point, right?
Well,
like,
no, define that, because someone may not know what that is.
Okay, sure. So imposter syndrome, by the way, it's not really a syndrome. It's sort of a colloquial term. Yeah.
They talk about that in med school.
Well, I think in any field, it's just sort of like out in the world. It's not like you're not.
It is in any field. You're right. Why did I just say that?
I don't. I don't know, because it feels diagnostic, but it's not, right? It's not actually.
I think I just got confused with med school syndrome, where you're diagnosing yourself with every like medical issue. Isn't that a thing?
Well, yeah, but it's kind of similar. Like it's not. It's just sort of like a
colloquial. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
So imposter syndrome basically means like when we're in some kind of role and we feel like a fake, right? So people can feel it in anything. People can feel it like if you're a new parent, you might feel imposter syndrome. Like, oh, how can I call myself a dad? Like, I don't feel like a dad. I don't know what I'm doing, right? So most of us are, familiar with that experience, and it can be really difficult to connect with our authentic selves while taking on a new role or being in a position where there's a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations put on us, right?
Yes.
And then that can lead to engaging in inauthentic behavior.
Yeah, which everyone can, again, you can you smell that. And that's the intuition you talked about.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
how do you teach your supervisees about that intuition or authenticity?
Well, intuition, of course, that's another episode that we did, so I won't get into that, I guess. But authenticity, again, all roads lead to mindfulness. I really help them start by like being in their bodies, right? Like I'll say like, I want you to pay attention to like get in a mindful body posture, like roll your shoulders back, put your feet on the ground. And I'll also highlight moments. So when we're supervising students, we watch videos of their therapy sessions, because students work under our licenses when we're supervising. So I'll also highlight moments in session when they seem like themselves. Like I'll actually say to supervisees, there was a moment in the session that seemed like you. And then I'll ask, did you feel more like yourself in that moment? And usually they'll say, yeah. And I'll be like, okay, and that was different than this other moment where it sounded like you were trying to emulate something I said, for example, opposed to, just being yourself. I mean, how do you do it?
It's beautiful. Well, I'm also sitting here thinking, God, you're so good, because I think a lot of us kind of breeze through some of the videos or the audio recordings, but I think you as a good behaviorist probably look and give them some incremental good feedback. So again, I would love if you were my supervisor.
Pete's, I've got a Pete fan club today. I'm really into it.
So authenticity. So we could think about it in the real world, in your professional world, and it's almost like that sort of, you always, it is that sort of boundaried feeling or boundary vulnerability with others.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting you brought up when you said like intuition specifically, not just intuitive sense. I think it's also a feeling that we have within ourselves when we're connected to that core sense of ourselves, like intuition, or, obviously in a lot of Eastern traditions, like the core self. I'm also, of course, thinking about values. Like that's often a way I try to help people connect with authenticity as well. Like I'll say again, it's when you're focused on what you connect with, you're being your authentic self.
Yes.
Right. Like, because it's something, my apologies to the listeners. It's almost hard to put words on, right?
No, I think you've done a good job with it.
So, but do you agree with that though, Pete? You know what I'm saying? It's like, as we're talking about it, I'm like, we're using language the best that we can to describe what it is.
Yeah.
Though, I recently read a quote that I found really helpful. It's like, but the language is the map and not the territory.
Yeah.
It's like authenticity, like we're using the map to describe it, but it's not the same thing as the territory. It's something that we feel, like you said, we smell it, right?
And we're saying it from a clinical lens. So I think it'll be helpful and tangible in the real world, because there are times where, you'll, like you said, you'll be yourself, say at a concert, but
Yeah.
you're also going to, maybe let go a little bit, or maybe be a little bit more reserved because the person you're with is letting go more. And that's why I start off by saying, like, I think
Yeah.
there's a chameleon aspect to this. And maybe that's just because of, like you have also said, is the intuition, so you sort of know when you need to, scale it back or dive right in.
Yeah. Well, so I think the dialectic here would be that what's changeable
Right.
is the behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're doing in a given context. So what we say, how we're dressed, like how, I don't know, like just anything that we're doing.
Yes.
And the authenticity piece is feeling like oneself across contexts, right? So, I would ask listeners to think about, like, when do you feel yourself? Like, it's, gosh, I guess I would even say when we're connected to authenticity, there's an ease, perhaps, kind of that
I like that.
right? That we can
Yeah.
then bring to
Yeah.
whatever context we're in, whether we're behaviorally letting loose or being more buttoned up.
Yeah.
Your sense of who you are is very, for me, I mean, I guess I'm speaking my own personal experience, when I feel very grounded, I feel very solid.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all?
Well, I was meeting with an executive recently, and I realized that it was like the second meeting we had. It was more social, even though it's a colleague, and who happened to be an executive, one of the worlds I'm in. And so anyway, like, she like disclosed something to me that I had said the first time we met. And I was like, I said that to you the first time we met. I was, and my reflection was, oh, I guess I felt comfortable and I was being pretty authentic with you, because I shared more than I probably would have, or it just shocked me that I had said this thing to her about, like, I kind of name dropped in a way, which I don't do often. And so it was really
right. You were like, oh, well, and I think maybe that's an example, though, of where authenticity and honesty can be linked, right? So, like, when we can, I don't know, when we feel really ourselves and really safe, sometimes we might share more. Though, again, I think I would just be mindful to say that you can still feel really authentic while not sharing everything that's going on in your head, because it's more of a, again, not a clinical word here, but it's like a vibe, right? It's like a vibe that you feel and a vibe you put out.
Yeah. Brene Brown wrote on this, as we've referenced her before. And she says, if you think dealing with issues like worthiness and authenticity and vulnerability are not worthwhile because there are more pressing issues like the bottom line or attendance or standardized test scores, you are sadly mistaken. It underpins everything.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean,
worthiness, authenticity, vulnerability. I mean, these are all things that, they connect a lot to what we're talking about in terms of, like, behaviorism, and really thinking about the East, because, the gift that the East has brought to what you and I do in behaviorism is this idea of connecting to worthiness, authenticity, vulnerability. Because, I don't know that some of the first waves of psychotherapy would have done it in the way that we're doing it today.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, look, I think any skilled student of or teacher of human experiences, so be it in, modern Western psychology or, ancient, Eastern spiritual practices, I think anyone in that regard is attuned to authenticity as an important part of human experience.
Yes.
So I totally agree with you that it's not something maybe that we targeted as concretely in earlier forms of, it's certainly not in earlier forms of behaviorism, right? We were just focused on changing behavior.
Right.
Though, in the third wave, authenticity becomes a part of it's a value, right?
Yeah.
So it's something to connect with. It's this thing that's intangible and yet somehow tangible at the same time. Something that, again, we know it when we feel it. We know it when we see it.
Yeah. And earlier years or practices of psychotherapy, perhaps I'm going to say maybe even encourage people to be inauthentic at certain times. I'm thinking of, and this is like a very like narrowed example, but like it was 1973 that homosexuality was removed from the DSM. And so if you went to a therapist at that time, they would, encourage you not to be gay,
right?
Because then it was, not
right,
because there was this pathology. And so even today so what I'm thinking then is about like multicultural competence also links really
Yes.
nice to the work we're doing to say like, hey, how do we help people find their authenticity?
Yes. Well, and be that, I mean, and then that goes to what we say a lot on this podcast, right? Which is that there's no one right way to be a person.
That's right.
Right. So there's no one right way to be a person. There's no one right way to do things. And, it's connecting to your own inner wisdom as a human being. Right. And this, again, I never really thought about it this way until today, but it's really linked to intuition, I think, in my opinion.
Well, we've said that a lot today. And
Yeah.
I think just some other science, you have Kernis and Goldman in 2000 had the authenticity inventory. So for any listeners out there, and for us social scientists, we have a measure for almost everything. So there's an authenticity inventory. And there were 4 key factors that they study, which are self-awareness, unbiased processing, behavior, and then relational orientation. So that's authenticity, how self-aware are you around who you're being, that chameleon piece, this unbiased processing, so non-judgmental sort of view of who you are, the behavior, so knowing, how you act in certain situations, and then relational orientation, so your interpersonal skills that you implement.
I mean, I think that's nicely broken down in what they were assessing, though I'm actually surprised that there's not an emotional component they assessed.
Well, self-awareness maybe,
but that's more cognitive or behavior. Like, I'm sorry, not cognitive, it's more behavioral. It's like I wonder about the because
the
connection part, right?
So again, just because we'll get to our producers on this, but the definition of the self-awareness factor is knowledge of and trust in one's own motives, emotions, preferences, and abilities. So there you go. I mean, you're so wonderful.
It's my number one fan today. I love it.
Yeah, but of course you picked up on that because it would have been. I had it in front of me, so I was reading it. But also I think of like emotional intelligence, and so self-awareness is always how they define even emotional intelligence. So for me, that links immediately. Sure.
No, well, and I've, of course, since it's a measure that's going to be defined behaviorally, though, it's that, because I guess to me the emotional component piece is what stands out most to me, I think, because I think, again, humans tend to get confused between practicing honesty behaviorally and practicing authenticity. And it's like, well, they're similar, though they're not exactly the same thing. Authenticity is something, again, it's that vibe I keep, coming back to today.
That vibe. I love that you're saying that. Yeah. And so I think for listeners, think about what it is that, you connect with and really, are you being authentic? But also, when is it important to be authentic versus that it's okay when you're not doing so non-judgmentally with compassion? And I don't know, any last words before we wrap up? Because I can't imagine that we're already at the end of how authentic. And I think you and I do a good job of being authentic here. Yeah,
because I think, well, at least, I only speak for myself, like that's a value of mine, right? It's practicing authenticity. And so I guess I would encourage people to say, to see how can you practice authenticity across contexts, right? Right.
Yeah.
So you can be more open or be more closed, and regardless of where you are, you could be alone in your house, right? And you can still be authentic.
I love that you just said that. So I'm going to end with a quote from Michael Jordan, who better to talk about authenticity.
Yeah.
I don't know why I just said that, but here it goes. Authenticity is about being true to who you are, even when everyone around you wants you to be someone else.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.